Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark Stay.
And I'm Mark DeVoe, and thank you to all of our lovely patrons and Academy members who make this podcast happen. We're so grateful to all of you. And if you would like to join the Academy, we have doors open right now for the new term, which starts at the beginning of September. So if you'd like to pop along to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com and pop in your application, you can have Mark and I as your mentors. You can access over 30 amazing courses, a roadmap taking you through the real complete process of writing your book, and join, I think, Mark, completely unbiasedly, probably one of the best writing communities.
No
and
question.
A place to meet new friends. No question, really.
Yeah, no question, really.
Honestly, to everyone in the Academy, you're absolutely awesome people. We don't know.
We love them.
We don't know how it is, but every single one of members of the Academy are just brilliant. So if you want to be a part of that really positive energy, imagine a group of people. It's like the podcast audience on steroids, Mark, isn't it?
They just want you to win. They just want each other to win. It's great. It's really, really
brilliant.
Good.
So come and join us, folks. This is going to be a life-changing experience for you. And you know what? Most importantly, it'll give you that kick up the butt, that accountability that every writer needs. And to be honest, every writer lacks, don't they, Mark? When you don't have a publisher, an agent telling you you've got to deliver you need something like this community where we can help you set your deadlines and hold you accountable. Just want
to make it clear, there is no actual butt kicking. We're talking metaphorical. We don't take you into a room with a big boot and kick you up the bum. That doesn't happen. I mean, if you want it, I'm sure it could be arranged. But we're just not into that sort of thing. So
no, absolutely not. No, but do come along to the website, look at some of the testimonials of some of the Academy members. Absolutely fantastic. Anyway, Mr. Stay, we've had a mental week, haven't we? But there's a certain author keeps cropping up. It seems to be in our universe right now on all different levels, and people might know them. But tell us about what you discovered this week.
I should have seen this coming, because I've known this book is coming because I'm a fan of the author. I just never put two and two together like an idiot. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share screen. I'm going to do this is live typing on the internet with Mark Stay. So
I'll give people a kind of a running commentary if you're listening to us on the podcast. So Mark's just gone to Amazon UK,
Amazon.co.uk,
and he's typing in.
I'm typing in the words Holly King. Okay.
Holly King.
The Holly King is my new book that's coming out in September. It's the fourth of the Witches of Woodville books. So if I type in Holly King and just tap enter, guess what comes up first? not The Holly King by Mark Stay, but Holly by Stephen King comes up as the top search result. And I've known this book is coming, and I've spoken to, there's a new Stephen King. Oh, that's great. What's it called? Holly. Oh, right. Because it's about a character that was, I think, started in Mr. Mercedes and has been in a couple of other books, and now she's got her own book. And it's like, actually, it's not one of his horror books. It's like a thriller. So anyway, he's winning the SEO war.
How could that happen? But this is brilliant, though. I want you to do a quick test. Go up to the top of the page. Mm-hmm. Type in King Holly, so the other way round. See what comes up.
Okay. King Holly. Oh,
there you go.
Results.
So anyone searching for Stephen King's book is going to see your book second.
Well, this is it. I sort of put a thing in the BXP team and said, is this a bad thing or a good thing? And everyone's like, this is a great thing, because everyone's going to see your book.
You might start selling hundreds of thousands of copies. And Mark, who knows? I mean, if only you'd call yourself Stephen Mark or Mark Stephen or something like that, you'd have the complete integration then, wouldn't you?
I mean, I may have started some, because everyone in the BXP group is going, right, what's getting published when my book's coming out? What do I change the title to?
That's completely legitimate. Well,
I wish it was that clever.
But, this is a whole new level of also boughts. It's like first searched, right? Yeah. Because how many people search for something and end off, you know what it's like? You go on Amazon to find one thing, and you end up, you go on Amazon to buy a book and you end up buying like a washing machine or something. There's a whole world. Oh, brilliant. I love it. So can you pre-order so presumably you can pre-order the book now, can you? Or is it just?
Yes, you can. Okay. Pre-order both of them. This is the other thing. His is out the 5th of September. Mine's out the 14th. So we're coming out within a fortnight of each other as well. So
it's almost like you've got the hive mind going. Well, there's this, and this isn't the only Stephen King thing that's happening. They'll just listen to the podcast next couple of weeks. I'm not going to make any major promises stuff, but there's some fun stuff that comes up about Mr. King, and weirdly enough, like completely independently, all of this, the coaching that I did on Monday for the life coaching for writers in the Bestseller Academy. I specifically, we focused a whole session on perfectionism and the difficulties of perfectionism and the problems with self-criticism, how authors, we're our biggest own self-critics and we get in the way of our own work. And I pulled up a brilliant couple of minute video of Stephen King being interviewed about how he, his first novel, and the novel that broke him basically, in a good way, the novel that made his first breakthrough was fished out of his wastepaper basket by his wife. And it was the manuscript of Carrie, which he threw away. He didn't like it. And it was incredible showing all of the Academy members this video whilst we were talking about, I don't think my novel's any good. I don't think it's good enough. I don't think I'm a good enough writer. I'm thinking of quitting the manuscript. And then seeing Stephen King talking about the very same thing they were all experiencing. And I was saying, everybody who you look at and you maybe idolize or say, wow, if only one day I could be like him. They've all been through the same struggles that everyone is experiencing today, wherever they're at in the journey. So yeah, it's a lot. But
can you imagine if Tabitha King didn't pull that manuscript?
Well, that's what I said in the coaching. I said, what would he be like? Stephen King would probably be a gravedigger or a retired gravedigger now, but like done something completely different, and the world would not have had his books. And every bookshop in the world would be slightly different because they wouldn't have that entire shelf or section. Section on Stephen King. And I'd be
top of the search engine.
And you
thing
would
on Amazon.
Be, right? In a different universe, Mark. You could have been. The Holly King could be the thing. Well, maybe the Holly King will be the book that has that kind of effect, because. But
maybe, I mean, the thing is, you just don't know. Would I be the writer I am today without Stephen King? I mean, through my teens, he was a massive influence. It's like that film Yesterday where there are no Beatles songs and the guy starts playing Beatles songs. The one that rips off
Back to Reality's
allegedly. That one. Yeah. No. Don't. Any lawyers listening?
We're jesting.
But I mean, the premise doesn't hold up. But it's that thing, because they've got musicians featured in that. And I know there are musicians that who wouldn't be musicians unless they'd heard the Beatles. I mean,
absolutely. And how many people, Mark, listening to this podcast right now can ask exactly the same question? Because I think Stephen King had such a huge influence.
Oh, massive.
Again, it was Cujo was the first kind of, proper thriller / horror that I read. And I went on a 5-6 year binge. Everything that he wrote, everything. Yeah. It was the biggest author I read as a kid. So amazing stuff. But there's a lot going on. I'm super excited for that. We'll have to see how that all goes. If you, I'm going to say this because you won't, Mark, because you're too blimmin' humble, but go and buy Mark's book. Go and support Mark. And if you're going to buy Stephen King's book as well, great. Go get both of them. But I want to see what happens. I want to see if there's a little kind of like uptick in the orders for that one.
Well, it's not for pre-order in the States quite yet. It will be available in the States, but because I'm self-publishing, I'm not putting it out quite yet. So keep an eye out for that. You can order it direct from me. I'll put a link in the show notes. You can get a paperback that I'll sign and dedicate and do all that lovely stuff. So yeah.
I got to say, Mark, as well, thank you to everyone, listeners, BXT members, Academy members who are like egging me on with this non-fiction project.
Yeah, how's it going?
Yeah, good. I keep getting messages, and the messages are simply "go for it." That's I don't know if it's like they've decided that's a good, but it's actually really. I mean, it's wonderfully encouraging to have people like pushing you and say, "Come on, do this, make it happen." So, it's been another. I'm still in the notebook phase. Right. I'm procrastinating, Mark, but you know what? I do think there's a value, especially if you're writing nonfiction. It's harder to pants nonfiction, I think. I'm plotting a fiction book, pantsing a fiction book. You can leave a lot of space. But I think, if you think about how nonfiction works, you have to usually, you put a book proposal to a publisher before you've written the book. And you've got to literally show them the whole, all the chapter headings and what you're going to be writing about. So it's a bit of a different approach. But I am enjoying it, and I'm looking forward to sharing the kind of process with people and seconding challenge.
Are you still world building? You talked about world building a couple of weeks ago in that non-fiction space.
I am, but what I'm doing is I'm world building the series. So I'm not world building the book. This is my way of getting. So if you're going through this challenge, whether you're writing fiction or non-fiction, where you have too many ideas, it might be too many ideas in your novel, or it might be too many non-fiction books you want to write. I'm going through this idea of world building where I've chucked every single thing I wanted to write about onto like the table. And then I started looking at like, how do I pick one thing, or is there some kind of connection between all of these things? And what's happened is the more I looked into it, the more I've seen what first was a disparate connection. And I'm like, no, there's a whole flow happening. This is stage one, and it literally 7 stages, and each one potentially, he says, this is crazy, but potentially could be a book. But there's a overriding story arc across the whole series. So I've drawn a lot from everything that we've learned about from authors thinking about, that bigger picture of the story. And it is very much a chronological progression that you go through these stages. And by the time you get to the 7th book, it's like friggin', honestly, like, I don't know what's going to come out of that one, but it's really big stuff, really deep and big stuff. So I'm looking forward to kind of.
I'm glad you explained that so well, because a couple of people have asked me about world building in non-fiction on social media. And what's Mr. D doing? And I'm like, I haven't got a clue.
No, I don't know. I'm probably making it up as I go along, folks. But one day I might document the process for everyone if it works.
No, it's good. Well explained.
Remember,
well explained.
It's all in experiment, folks. Right? Brilliant stuff. Well, talking of world building and all kinds of fun things. Let's find out who's today's special guest.
Oh, this is really, really good interview, actually. Jeremy Szal is the author of the Common trilogy from Gollancz, which includes Stormblood, Blindspace, and Wolfskin. He's the author of over 50 science fiction short stories. We're going to be talking about short stories. We'll get into that. It's been translated into 6 languages. He was the editor for the Hugo-winning Starship Sofa until 2020. He now lives in Sydney, Australia with his family. He has a new novella, Scream in Blue, set in the same world of the Common. And he's also one of a number of authors who are speaking out about their mental health and how it can be affected by the roller coaster of being published. So we discuss writing action scenes, breaking his readers, and the reality of writer burnout.
Brilliant. So let's listen to Mark chatting with the fascinating Jeremy Szal.
Jeremy Szal, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today, sir?
Very good, sir. How are you?
I'm tickety-boo. Thank you for asking. We were talking just before the recording. We last saw each other at Worldcon in Dublin, which pre-pandemic feels like a lifetime ago. So,
really
how was that your first Worldcon, or had you been to others before that?
My debut Worldcon was Worldcon in Finland in 2017.
Oh, wow.
I had an agent back then. John Jarrell was my agent, and I had him, but I didn't have a book deal yet, and so I was relatively unknown, although some people did know me for my short fiction, my editing. But Finland Worldcon was also my first con ever, which was a huge amount of fun. But Dublin was really cool as well.
They're kind of bewildering, aren't they? They can be a bit much, I think, but it is a very welcoming community, and it's a great. Well, I mean, we're going to talk about this in a minute. You are someone who has embedded yourself in the world of publishing, in the world of science fiction. But let's talk about the new and exciting thing, because you've got a new novella, Scream in Blue, which is a standalone novelette set in the world of the Common, which is your series that started with Stormblood and Blindspace. Tell us about Scream in Blue.
Well, it tells the story of, well, to start off, to have a solid comparison, I need to explain what Stormblood is. And Stormblood is basically set in a world where this is a far future space opera where the DNA of an extinct alien race is used as a drug that makes people get addicted to adrenaline and aggression permanently. Once it's in your system, it cannot get out. And so the main character is trying to stop this drug from going on the market, and is trying to stop his brother from sabotaging the market, and all these very complicated emotional beats that get along with they're involved with it. This story tells a tale from the complete opposite perspective. It's telling this tale from the perspective of the drug mules, I would say, or storm dealing mules, basically, who transport this drug called Storm Tech throughout throughout the future city, and it's set in London because the anthology that I was asked to write it for was all the stories had to be centered around London as a theme in some way, and so I decided to set the story on Earth because the common trilogy novels, they all are predominantly set on a hollowed out asteroid that's got all these about hundreds and hundreds of different floors, hollowed out levels where all these different floors exist and all these different cultures exist. But I wanted to try and see what Earth looked like. And so I also wanted to kind of explore what it looked like, the drug industry looked like from the opposite perspective of someone actually doing the drugs instead of being the one trying to stop it. And so it follows Sola and her two friends as they basically navigate the labyrinth, Escher-like world of the far future drug industry and all the gangs and violence and underground cults and guilt that comes from dealing with such a drug in such a far future world.
This fascinates me because you've got this incredible universe that you're working in, the universe of the common. And these ideas, you said it was inspired by an anthology, and they said, can you set the story in London? But was there always a part of you, when you're creating these worlds and these epic stories, and folks, these books are brilliantly epic, when you're creating them, is there a part of you thinking, I'd love to explore around the corner there. I'd love to see what's going on over there, but I can't. I've got to focus on my main story here, but one day I'm going to go over and check that out. Is that what inspires little standalone stories like this?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's always fun to play around in different parts of the sandbox. One author I admire who does this incredibly well is Alistair Reynolds. He's got the Revelation Space universe, but he's got myriad of different types of stories and characters and situations that are going on throughout this galaxy. Although his world is fairly consistent in tone, you still have all these types of various stories and storylines that are happening. All these really cool little events that play out in different ways, especially when they alternate perspectives. And so there's a faction in Blindspace that are created. They're called the 40 Clips, and they basically are nomadic space warriors, basically that have filled their bodies with machines and have a very sort of basically a mashup of the basically a sort of faction that you would find in the Revelation Space universe, and also the Band of Brothers, the Brotherhood without banners from the A Song of Ice and Fire world. They have this sort of mythos about them in the sense of honor and loyalty, but also have, basically consist of however many alien species you like, and also have different parts of the bodies replaced with machines and respirators and all these other really cool, weird tech. And so I created them because I wanted to, in the future, explore some stories and explore some worlds and little events from their perspective and tell different stories from another perspective and see what's going on in their part of the world and what it's like to look through the space opera universe through the eyes of a nomad or a traveling alien or some sort of or someone on a spaceship, because these novels are pretty much grounded very much in Vakov as a first-person narrator, and it's very much concerned with his storyline and what's going on in his head and his emotions. But because I have this other faction, I can just go around and play with something completely different, and that's incredibly refreshing, especially when I've been writing these books for the past 6 years, and I do love them. I love Vakov as the main character, but sometimes it is really good to get a breath of fresh air.
Oh, no question. No question. And this is also, it works so well for someone who's new to your work, because if they've looked at it and thought, I might want to give that this is a great taster, because you can sort of dip a toe in and look at the universe through a completely different perspective. And it's kind of like a two-way mirror. They can go, oh, I want to see more of that, and go over there and check it out. So do check out Screaming Blue. One thing you get a ton of praise for is writing action. These books are full of action. Tell us, have you got any good tips for writing action, particularly in a kind of science fiction arena?
It's all about perspective. It's all about being there in the moment. I actually find that the best people who write action scenes are not science fiction authors. I think Joe Abercrombie is one of the best people working in the business who writes action, because it's all about perspective. It's all about the surprise, the visceralness, the intimacy of it, what it's like to grapple with someone spinning around, have blood, sweat, and teeth going everywhere, someone else's face in your face, teeth clenched, eyes crushed up in a killing rage. You swing your hammer, you're about to swing your hammer, but then if the end comes off, you end up smacking him on the head with the middle. But that's the weirdness and the visceralness and the surprise of a good action scene. And the other person that I like who does action really well is Pierce Brown of the Red Rising series, because he goes from 10 to 100 in no time at all. Like literally one chapter can be, anything could be happening. The next, they're literally being spat out of tubes, streaming down to a planet for a orbital invasion, in all these wrapped in all these mech suits, and as gunfire is streaming up towards them. And so again, he never breaks character. It's always about what it's like being in the moment, having that intensity, that fear pounding in your throat, that sense of feralness, that visceralness. There's one battle sequence in particular in Stormblood that I was inspired heavily by Battle of the Bastards from Game of Thrones season 6.
Oh, right, yeah.
Where, it's almost like the camera feels like, well, not really the camera, but you're strapped up behind the eyes of Vakov as or the Jon Snow in that case, as you're sliding between this feral, visceral battle, and you only see blurs, you only see suggestions of what's going on around him, but you get a sense of what's going on because you're locked into that perspective, and it never loses track. Although, and that's a huge amount of praise given the amount of crazy stuff that's going on in that battle. And I try to do the same here, where you get a suggestion of what's going on in the around Vakov as he's carving his way through all these soldiers, but it is primarily about him, what's going on through his eyes, about being in the battle in that very moment, what it's like to feel, sparks, seeing a sword come slashing towards you, and he holds up his blade and sparks go spraying in his face, and then he tries to slash at someone but slips in the mud and the blade goes whistling over his head. Then his muscles on autopilot, basically, he goes and stabs the other guy. It's all about like what it feels like to be there in that moment. And because I feel
like I'm there, Jeremy. I feel like I'm there. It's just like live writing. It's just sorry, I interrupted. Carry on.
Need to be charging someone for this. It's all about immersion for me. It's all about character, and I approach action scenes the way I approach any other scene, and that's about its character. What does it feel like? What does the person get? What does the character get out of this? How are they changed by the end? And how can I write it as intimately and with as much visceralness and greater impact as possible?
That's fantastic. And look, this is a series. It's got drug harvesting. It's got mind-blowing cyberpunk, space opera, explosive action. But at the heart of this is a platonic love story. I mean, this is one of the things you got a lot of praise for. Tell us the heart of this story as well, this series.
Well, it's concerns two characters, Vakov and Artyom. Their brothers grew up on a backwater planet with an physically abusive father, and as soon as he could, Vakov left for a war to get away from this planet because it was his only escape. Went to war, left his younger brother behind, got this toxic drug pumped into his bloodstream, made a huge, was only able to survive this war because of the relationships that he carved out with the other soldiers there. They became his brothers, in a sense, his brothers that he chose. And so when he came home from this war, his own brother doesn't want to bar of him. But then he finds out that his soldier brothers are being killed off one by one, being overdosed, and the prime suspect is his younger brother. And so it becomes a struggle between his actual blood family and the family that he carved out for himself, because him and his brother had a very good relationship growing up, and they leaned on each other to survive, and they went through a lot of hardships and survived those hardships because of the relationship they had. And now he's got to face tracking his brother down and finding out what's going on, and because his brother is involved in killing his other brothers. And so it's very much concerned with the sort of relationships that change and evolve over time, and what it can do to a person, time and distance. And so I think I've really much wanted to explore brotherhood in that sense, what it feels like to have that relationship with someone and yet feel betrayed, and yet still have part of you longs for them, part of you still trusts in them, part of you still wants that relationship back, even though it's painful in so many ways. And I wanted to explore the different facets of that, brotherhood, loyalty, honor, familiar relationships, platonic love. And as you said, it is a love story between two brothers, and it's very much concerns them and the decisions that they make and the consequences of those decisions, and their relationship ebbs and flows over the course of the story, especially in book 3 that I'm writing now, which I think has the most interesting dynamic out of all of them. It's I try to keep each book, I try to evolve relationships because I think that's to keep it interesting, and because honestly all of us in our day-to-day lives, as we grow older and have experience, our relationships with different people change and evolve, and we grow apart or we grow further and we adapt and that sort of things. And that's a sort of experience I'd like to bring to my novels as well, especially because in the first book, this isn't really getting into too many spoilers, but in the first book they were estranged. In the second book they're growing together again and gradually finding a way back to each other. And in the third book, which I will not spoil, has the most, as I said, interesting dynamic yet, and it's about fully exploring what happens now. They're at their capacity. They've reached what they think is the peak. Where do they go from there, and how do things continue to evolve and change as they deal with this madness that's infected the asteroid? And because even though they maybe have a good relationship in the start of book 3, that may not stay that way forever, and things change and things evolve. And I wanted to explore that pain. This is going to sound really, really cruel, but I actually want to break the reader. I actually do want to cause the reader pain.
That's our job, isn't it? Isn't that our job?
It's our job. I'm not getting paid enough for this, but it is my job. I actually do want to hurt. I do want to make the reader ache so they can. And I've had a lot of people tell me sometimes. I've had people come up, not actually approach me in person, but people have told me that they've cried in public reading my books because of they've been so moved emotionally. And I've told them, your tears are delicious. Can I just have put them in a cocktail glass so I can drink them? Not really, but it is incredibly moving to be told that. But that is exactly what I'm after. I'm actually trying to break the reader and make them run the gauntlet of emotions. They see how these brothers lived and survived and the hardships that they endured. But I also want to put them back together. This isn't a depressing, bleak, uber grim, dark book where everyone just gets slaughtered in the end, and this is nothing but wanton misery. I do want to be able to have a balance, and I think that being able to show the brokenness and the forlornness and the melancholy, but also having the hope and the relationships being built up and being able to see people change and evolve, that's part of the process as well, and that's very much what I'm trying to show.
Fantastic stuff. Let's go back because I read somewhere that when you mentioned Game of Thrones already, I read somewhere that when you were 17, you were inspired by a song on Ice and Fire, and you wrote, and I'm quoting you here, 600 pages of nonsense, which we love. We love hearing about those early novels that no one's ever going to read. So tell us about this 600 pages of nonsense when you were 17 and that first writing experience.
No, I'm not describing it. It's buried in a concrete bunker. No one is ever reading it. It was complete ripoff of George R. R. Martin's style and approach. Just happened to be set in a sci-fi world, and because I was playing Halo at the time, so I threw in a bunch of influences from Halo as well. Because why the hell not? It was great to do in my summer holidays when I finished high school. And it taught me a lot about the writing process. Well, actually, not really, because I didn't really know what the hell I was doing.
Yes, but that first novel is how we learn, isn't it? Those are the big lessons. But at 18, you sold your first short story, and I think you've written something like over 50 short stories since. And over time, you've embedded yourself in the world of publishing with short fiction. Tell us about selling that first story, what that felt like, and your journey to Stormblood.
Sure. Yeah, I don't remember exactly which story it was, because I think when I sold it and when they came out chronologically is a little bit different. But I will talk about the story that had the most impact, which is a story that I first sold to Nature. It's the first prose story that I sold. In the industry, we call it prose. The market pays more than 6 cents a word. this is Nature magazine, it's science journal, so they pay a lot more than 6 cents a word.
Right.
But I remember getting that email first thing in the morning and not believing my eyes that I actually sold a story to a pro magazine, and it was going to be published by Pan Macmillan, basically. And I was absolutely ecstatic. And I'd had 1 or 2 stories placed in token magazines and token markets, but they were getting no readership. But this was another thing entirely, and I was incredibly overjoyed. And it actually told me, I can do it. I actually can. I've cracked the code. It's not about syntax and symbolism. It's about black ink on white paper and sitting down in a chair and working your ass off and learning the craft and getting better and sending that stuff out. And so, I continued to write and submit short fiction, and I've had quite a few short stories published all over the place. I've also had, I think, translated into 9 languages. I think I've just had the 9th one just come out in a French magazine called Galaxy, SF Galaxies.
Wow.
And I've had 4 picked up by Sci-Fi SF World, which is a magazine in China. And they have a readership of over 1 million copies, circulation over 1 million. Yeah. I've had 4 stories translated by them over the years. And so that was pretty good. But to be honest, I think you do me too much credit. I actually don't really think I've embedded myself in the world of short fiction. I've never really sold a story to any of the what you would consider the big marks like Asimov's or Clark's World or anything like that. And there's a reason for that. It's because I actually do not really like short fiction in general. It's not my natural form style.
Well, it wasn't so much, it was just embedding yourself in the industry. I mean, you were talking at the beginning about going all the way, because you're in Australia, you went all the way to Finland for a Worldcon, you went all the way to Dublin, you're traveling halfway across the world, and you were determined to make this happen. I saw this in an interview from 2014. And I'm going to quote you here again. And you said, "I've nearly finished a novel of mine. An editor for one of the big 5 has already shown interest, which is enthralling. We met at a convention. We exchanged details. I kept the business card on my desk while I write, and it really helps me out. I don't know if it'll go anywhere, but I'm just praying that it will. And if it doesn't, I'll write another and another and another until I strike oil, just to make sure to be there to buy them when it happens." So this business card, this kind of token, this little totem of hope, tell us about that. Tell us, and what did it lead to?
Absolutely nothing, because this card was from a editor at Harper Voyager Australia, and I just cornered her after a panel and breathlessly pitched my YA/adult crossover novel to her, and she gave me her business card. And then I did a little talking to other authors, and I realized that the Harper Voyager imprint in Australia, A, does not pay advances, B, is basically a dusty outpost for the chief Voyager imprint, and C is you get little to no attention if you do submit to them. And even if you do, they mostly drop you after your initial books are done. And every single author I know who's gotten a book deal with Voyager Australia has been dropped almost regardless of sales, and so, being with Voyager Australia does not mean you're going to be with Voyager UK or US.
Right.
So you're
right.
Australia only. And, Australia's population and readership compared to America it's not even worth mentioning, the comparison. But I was that desperate that I would have taken anything. But although I am a person who is naturally impatient, the one I can give myself credit for being patient enough to write a novel that was actually good enough, because I think if I submitted some of my other novels, they could have very well have been picked up by this editor. And although she's left the company years ago, they could have been picked up and published, but it would have been a rush job, a hack job, and I would have blown my chance at really landing, doing a good serious land as a debut author. And so I did wait until I wrote a novel I think it was after I finished university. In 2016, I was, considering, do I want to enter the workforce? Or do I want to work part-time as a construction laborer with my father, who runs a business? And do I want to take another crack at writing a novel? And I did. And I wrote a novel in 3 months. I wrote 1,000 words every day after work. I spent a few months tidying it up. when I did tie it up, I sent it out to a bunch of agents. Between that time, I wrote Stormblood. And about 6 months later, John Jarrold approached me to say, yes, I want to represent you for this previous novel. And so that was, a very wise decision, not entering the workforce full time. The novel obviously didn't go anywhere, and I'm glad it didn't because it wasn't quite there yet. And I think that it was a bit of a juvenile attempt at science fiction. I don't really think it had anything to say the way Stormblood does, and I don't really think it had the punch that Stormblood has. And I think that Stormblood definitely is a much better representation of me as an author and my voice and my style, because the previous novel was written in third person, because I thought, well, third person is kind of what people want, and I wasn't really confident enough to do first person. And the previous novel was very plot driven, whereas Stormblood is very character driven and very voice driven and is in first person, which is much more my thing. And I wrote it in a, no pun intended, I wrote it in a storm. It just flew off the page. And I was delighted with what was coming out of me. And I can't say that I've ever had that same experience with any novel before or since. And so I'm very, very grateful and glad that Stormblood ended up being the one that got people's attention and became my debut.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about, because that kind of segues on to a tweet that you did. Now, we're recording this in April, and you put a tweet out at the beginning of March, a sort of a Twitter thread out in the beginning of March about something that I think not nearly enough authors talk about, which is the reality of publishing. You have put your heart and your soul into Stormblood. You spend 3 years working on the sequel, Blindspace. You put your heart and soul into that. And for whatever reason, Stormblood did very well, but Blindspace, you said in your Twitter thread, there was a big drop-off, didn't work as well. And you, like many authors who, don't talk about this, although we're starting to see this conversation. There was an article in the Bookseller yesterday about disillusionment among authors and the publishing process. So let's talk about that Twitter thread, what prompted that, and how things have changed since then and how you're feeling since then. Because just to give this some context, folks, there was a survey conducted by the Bookseller and the results were announced this week. 54% of authors found the process of publishing their debut book negatively affected their mental health, while just 22% described it as a positive experience overall. And we have a lot of expectations about the publishing industry. We tend to only hear about that 1% who get the big advances and the book tours and the movie deals and all that kind of stuff. So going into publishing, what were your expectations about what would happen with Stormblood? And were you thinking about book 2 and 3 beyond that?
First, I just want to circle back really quickly. So it's only 54%, really? Like that seems like a very low number. Very low number. To be fair, I think they only asked 120 authors, if that.
Right. Yeah.
So which explains the numbers, to be honest. But yeah, look, I actually don't think I was as starry-eyed and doe-eyed and as some authors may have been, because I had spoken to a lot of authors and I'd worked as an editor. And so I knew what the realities were, and I knew that the majority of books, do not earn out, and I knew the majority of books don't sell well, and that even if you do get picked up, you can get dropped, if your sales can get dropped and axed if they don't perform, and that your career can be over and dead in the water. And if you don't have a good support network, you can be screwed. All these other things. And so I did know that going in, but I told myself, even when I was writing the books, I knew this could happen, but I couldn't not write. And so,
yes,
but so I kept at it anyway. And I think that generally Stormblood did well. Obviously, as we were saying before, it came out at the peak of COVID. Yes. It came out on the same day as, I think, Blackout Day, when the race riots were happening in America.
Right.
And so that was a double whammy. And so that was tremendous fun. Obviously there were more important things happening around the world, but was not helpful in terms of the sales of this book. And, the fact that I think my arcs got cancelled, publicity tours got cancelled. A lot of things like that happened. I was supposed to be overseas. Like Worldcon in New Zealand got cancelled, and that would have been where it would have been launched. The Lance tied in the release of book one for a convention now called Supernova, which is the biggest convention in Australia, and it's one of the only conventions that I know of that pairs authors and actors, the big stars, together. And I've done big Supernovas since, and you're literally in the same green room as people like Carl Urban and Tamora Morrison or Boba Fett and people like that, which is tremendous fun, by the way. But the point is that people who go there to see people like Billy Butcher do end up passing the author table and buying books, and I've sold very well at those conventions.
Yeah.
But I was supposed to be there for the launch of Stormblood, and Hachette would have likely have done some really nice event because I've done it for other authors there. But that all got canned, all of it got axed, and so I am actually amazed that the book did as well as it has, like especially in trade paperback. It's been quite strong, and that's the words of my agent, not me. And John Jarrell, my agent, he will never tell me anything, shower words of praise that he doesn't need to.
Nice.
So, in the sense that I mean that he will always, he tries to be positive, but he will always be honest. And so when he says quite strong, it's quite strong.
Yeah, John's been on the podcast. He's one of the good guys. We love John. Yeah,
John's great, very good man. He keeps me on the straight and narrow. But yeah, it was a bit of an insight into, just how many things can screw up a book launch. And when you have all those things together happening at once, it can screw up a book launch even more. And so I am actually surprised that Stormblood did well. But Blindspace, for whatever reason, did not get the same impact. And, let's not, before I want to confuse anyone, Stormblood was never a bestseller. It doesn't have a US deal because any potential US deal got canned because of COVID. And I know that for a fact because editors have told us our wallets have tightened. We can't look at this right now. And so I could have had a US publisher, and that the advance that they paid me could very well have made my book earn out. So I could have been raking in nonstop profits for every sale. I don't know. That may not have happened, but it could have. But it's not happened. And so there's been a lot of things that have messed with the book's success, and it's definitely not a huge success. The sales are good, not amazing, not stellar, but it's been not too bad, especially for someone like me who is Australian, who is a debut author who's writing science fiction, not fantasy, because fantasy is 75% of the market. So I think that it hasn't done too badly. But the second book, for whatever reason, didn't get the same traction. It came out in the very tail end of COVID, which didn't help either.
No.
It came out at the end of the year, and there were a lot of screw-ups down the track for various reasons with launches and delayed releases and that sort of thing. And that didn't help either.
No.
And there's only so much you can be on Twitter for. And as I said in that tweet thread, that sometimes it just feels like you're screaming into a void, and there's only so many times you can scream, buy my book, promote me, read my stuff, give me reviews on Amazon. And it feels exhausting, especially when you feel like you're not getting that support either from the community or the publisher. And, I'm talking in general terms because both have been very, very good at times, but it can feel exhausting. And especially when we do this thing to ourselves where we have this sort of reward system in our head. And if we don't get this reward, if we put in a certain amount, X amount of effort, and if we don't see Y results, it feels like X effort is worthless and that we are worthless and this is terrible. When that is not true, because we may have done something amazing, but because we haven't reaped that reward that is almost completely out of our control, then it can have a huge impact, I think, on us both mentally and creatively and things like that.
What was the reaction to that Twitter thread?
Very good, actually. I was completely surprised by just how well the community responded, and I got people from all over the world. I think it got something like 80,000 views.
Wow. Okay.
The book was number one on the bestseller list in ebook in the UK, Amazon UK. And book, Blindspace, that is. So not even just the first book, the second book was that was on the bestseller list, and Stormblood went up to 18 or something like, or 16 or something like that. So the second book was selling more than the first.
Right.
Were writing into me all over the world. Like I think people like Max Gladstone liked the tweet, and so that brought a huge amount of traction to it. And had some guy who worked, I think, for Dropbox as a community manager, basically quote tweeted me and said, "Support new authors, buy the books I just did." And in his tweets, you had a bunch of guys who worked for Microsoft and Sony and all these other tech companies saying, "Yep, I've done the same. Yep, I'm going to do that." And I was just flabbergasted at the support that I got. And it's not even just people retweeting, it's actually voting with their wallet, spending their hard-earned cash on someone that they've never heard of before, and supporting me in that sense. And I was incredibly humbled and incredibly grateful. Like I was just I was walking on sunshine for the rest of the day. It was very, very gratifying. And not just because, I had enough money to buy the yacht. I didn't have enough money to buy it. I still don't have enough money to buy it. But just because, that outpouring of support, again, the community can seem very scattered and in concrete and all over the place and ill-focused. But when it comes to the crunch, if someone does say, "Guys, I need help," seriously, people can and will respond.
Yeah.
And it was just very, very gratifying to see that people care.
So how has that changed your attitude? How has that changed going forward with book 3?
Look, it actually told me that I need to spend a lot less time on social media because it's damaging for my mental health. Yeah. As I said just before about that reward effort system, you can put so much effort into trying to make something happen and trying to make something count. And if you don't get that tangible reward on screen, you feel like a failure. And that's not the sort of thing I need bouncing around in my head before I sit down to write first thing in the morning. It's not good. It just eats up all your time. And there was a time where I was literally, sometimes before I even I would waste an hour, trawling through review sites and seeing if I can, any new book bloggers want to read this book and read my book, if there's anyone I can contact. And it's just, it's suffocating creatively. It uses up a completely different part of your brain. It uses up mental energy in a way that just is not conducive to producing good fiction. And, it would be really, really nice if all of us authors didn't have to be on social media and we could just write our stories and the publisher would take care of everything. But that's not quite the reality that we're facing now, because a lot of us don't sell well enough for that. And we do need to, grind the mill, basically, wear that millstone day in and day out. But it did teach me, there is a time to just shut off social media. And I did get sales figures recently, and I felt, partially thanks to that boost, I felt somewhat confident enough. Okay, I can actually take a step back now. I would have done so anyway, because I think it's just not helpful to the mental health. And I just really needed to take a step back, breathe, focus on the book, and let things take care of themselves. And if they don't, I can take care of them later, because the book isn't going anywhere and the audience isn't going anywhere. But and it can be really hard, even, seeing other people soaring ahead of you. I'm very good friends with Richard Swan, author of Justice of Kings. I knew him before he was published. I took him out for drinks the day his book came out, and he hit the Sunday Times bestseller list within 2 weeks. And given that there was a war on literally in Europe at the time, it's quite amazing that it happened that way. And obviously he's got a huge readership, and, it can still feel disappointing in a way that you can see other people soaring ahead of you and you're lagging behind, and you wonder, what the hell did I do wrong? And what do they do right? But it's not about that. It's just about all these other variables that you have no control over.
Absolutely.
And it's a sad thing to admit, but ultimately there's very little an author can do to make the book a success or not, because the default is failure for a book, unfortunately. And that failure doesn't have to immediately look like, okay, you're never going to be writing again. Failure can just look like, okay, my expectations weren't met, or something along those lines. And
well, you can talk about failure and success. It depends what metrics you're measuring that with. I mean, if you want to talk about, sales, bestsellers, that's one thing, but also the fact that you talked earlier about people have been moved emotionally by your writing, and for me, that is a sign of a successful writer.
Of course,
it's and thank you so much for sharing that. I really, really appreciate it. So you've already mentioned briefly the third book, which I believe is called Wolfskin. I suspect you can't talk too much about that yet, but you're writing, you're focused on it, it's coming. You said, you're taking these brothers to the next level. You're going to torture them, make their lives hell, which we're really looking forward to.
Well, that goes without saying, Mark. saying, like, you don't go to a Metallica concert and ask them to turn the volume down, do you?
Well, look, we wish you all the best with that. Folks, look, Stormblood, Blindspace are out there. And, if you want to dip a toe in, grab a copy of Screaming Blue. Get them all. Get this man a yacht. I suspect that's not where you... Damn it. I don't think you really want a yacht. They're really expensive to run.
No, I want a gin. I want a lot more gin.
Gin. We can sort that. Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing this with us and being so honest about it. I think that very few authors do that. And I'm glad it was, in the end, a cathartic and positive experience. Mm-hmm. And we spoke about this before the recording. At the risk of sounding like a patronizing old giffer, you're 27 years old, which I think is the age that I started writing seriously. So you have an incredible career ahead of you. And we wish you all the best and hope to speak to you again soon.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me on, Mark. It was an absolute pleasure.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. Wow, what a roller coaster. I mean, we talk about the roller coaster of writing. There's so many things to unpack in that interview, isn't there, Mark? And I want to dive in and start with... I just have to go straight there. This idea of breaking your reader. What was it Jeremy said? He said, "Your tears are delicious." It's like brilliant. But it's a very interesting approach, isn't it? Because I'm real big one on focusing on emotion. In writing, if you can feel emotion when you're writing something, if you feel moved by what you're writing, then you have a really strong indication that that's what it's going to be doing for the reader as well. And I think there's two wonderful things that every author wants to hear from their writer, and that they cried, but they either cried tears of happiness, the big kind of, it all comes together at the end, big happy ending, or tears of pain or sorrow because, one of the main characters or their favorite character gets knocked off. And I think to accomplish that as an author is a kind of next level, isn't it? It really is.
I think, whatever the emotion, you can make people gasp, you give people thrills, you can make people laugh. That's one of the hardest ones, making people laugh, making people cry. It does, when I hear that from readers, it does give me a tremendous sense of achievement, because I know what that feels like when I've read a book and bawled my eyes out or laughed or been thrilled on the edge of my seat kind of thing. I know what that's like. So to elicit that reaction from a reader is job done. Thank you very much. The worst thing you can hear is, it's all right. That is the worst thing. That's worse than a 1-star review. Because if a 1-star review, someone hated your book. You elicited hatred from them. So at least that's something. Whereas, that kind of tepid, it's all right. That's the worst. That is the absolute worst. Yeah. So, and I'm increasingly aware of this as I write stuff, because I will sit there going, this is gonna push them over the edge. This is gonna make someone gasp. This is, talking about the Holly King. I don't want no spoilers, but the last line, I deliberately, I was sitting there going, because that's just gonna. But I'm gonna get angry emails about that one, because but it's what we do. This is what we do. We want to give people a roller coaster, a journey that's going to thrill them and delight them and elicit all these responses. And it is, and this is probably my I get hauled over the coals, is that a thing, for this sometimes, because I will say that people respond more to emotion than they do plot. When you get people going, oh, the massive plot hole in so and so, I don't care. And I don't care about continuity errors. All I care is how something makes me feel.
Yeah.
When you get people going, well, actually, I went to see Oppenheimer at the weekend, okay?
Did you see, a big question, did you also do back-to-back with Barbie as well?
We're seeing Barbie tomorrow night. Okay,
You're actually going to go and see it?
Yeah, absolutely. I just couldn't do two in the same day. It just wasn't practical. But I saw Oppenheimer. We don't have an IMAX near us, so I sat in the front row of my local View. That's a poor man's IMAX. You sit in the front row. And I was transfixed for 3 hours. It's astonishing performances, these big moral dilemmas, and I was really moved by it, and it was an emotional thing. And now I'm seeing articles like, well, have you seen the massive error in Oppenheimer? And all it is there are some people waving flags, and it's Stars and Stripes. They got 50 stars instead of 49 because Hawaii wasn't a state until 1950 or whatever.
Someone has actually paused the video and counted the stars.
You sad little sack. It's like, that's not, I don't care. I genuinely don't care. All I care is how that movie made me feel about these massive dilemmas that this man and his team had and the consequences of what they had to live. I think, Christopher Nolan gets accused of being a cold filmmaker and not being emotional. And actually, I disagree. I think a lot of his films are, and this is his most emotional one of the lot. Wow. I think, so that's what
I think you're absolutely right. I think, when you think about literally a roller coaster, when you get off a roller coaster, you're not complaining about the plot or the journey. The point is it's what you felt. It's the drops, it's the fear, it's the highs, it's the lows, it's the anticipation. And I mean, but combine an amazing plot with emotion. Winner, chicken dinner, really. I mean, if you get both of those, but you're absolutely right. I was talking about completely okay, let's go opposite. Let's go Barbie end of Oppenheimer. I sat down the other day. I was worn out. I thought, I just want to sit and watch some rubbish on TV. And I went on, and the original series of Different Strokes was on. Do you remember Different Strokes?
Oh my God, I know. Oh, wow. Is someone still showing that?
1978, right? Do you remember Gary Coleman? I used to watch that all the time as a kid. And it was season 1, episode 1. I thought the very first episode of Different Strokes, I haven't seen this in years. So I stuck it on. And you want to talk about continuity? I mean, it was absolutely hilarious just watching it again. But like almost every single shot, like they're all sitting in different positions whenever they change. Really? That's great. And like we didn't care. We didn't care as kids. But yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. But yeah, I very much enjoyed watching Gary Coleman's debut.
Oppenheimer strokes? No, that sounds wrong.
So tell me, for everyone asking the question, like, what's the draw for Barbie for you, Mark? What's the? Is it just a curiosity factor, or are you genuinely kind of like going to watch it from a story perspective?
It's Greta Gerwig, who's one of our great filmmakers and writers, doing Barbie. That immediately, the clash of those two things
is that like kind of Musk and Zuckerberg getting in is it like the most unusual thing you can imagine?
Well, I'm just fascinated because she's a brilliant, thoughtful writer and filmmaker. And I've seen the trailer where it's all pink and Barbie says, have you ever thought about death? And I'm like, sold. I'm there. That's it. Barbie has an existential crisis. Ticket sold, please. And funny enough, I went to, because I sometimes write in the Curzon Cinema in Canterbury because I got a lovely little coffee shop there, and I sit and write there sometimes. I was talking to the manager, and I was saying, who's winning, Barbie or Oppenheimer? And he said, "Oh, Barbie."
Barbie is, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, Oppenheimer's had
office receipts. Yeah,
Oppenheimer's had an amazing opening, but Barbie is doing really, really well. And I said, "Here's the thing, though, who is it for?" Because Barbie movies, you think the target audience for that is going to be young girls who play with Barbie. And he said it's across the board. It's rated over here. I mean, in the States, I think it's PG-13, but over here it's a 12, which means anyone under 12 has to have an adult with them, which doubles your box office. So, you know, so I think I haven't seen it myself. I'll report back next week.
Okay, I want to hear it because I haven't got any intention of seeing it, but I've got to say I might get sucked into it if everyone starts saying. But maybe it's a 12. And maybe it will be true to form when we talk about Barbie talking about death. But what I want to really know, Mark, and this is what I want you to report back on, is does Barbie lose a leg? Because that would be real in the reality of like every kid's like at least one or two limbs have to disappear during and maybe that's why it's got a 12 because she actually does lose a limb. I mean, I joke,
or someone cuts her hair or whatever, or
cuts her hair or puts
covers her face in crayon, pen on her face. I'll just put some makeup. Oh,
I bet you there'll be some gags about that's kind of like sluck in there for the adults, but brilliant.
I wouldn't be surprised.
But how did we get here? Yes. And how do we get back?
We were talking to, we were talking about Jeremy, weren't we?
We were talking about Sorry, Jeremy. Oh, I love it. You only come here for the banter, folks. We know you don't really. You just want to talk about Barbie. Let's now go to the next item that we want to talk about, which was, and I love this, 600 pages of nonsense. We talk about like things readers have said, writers have said, like who hasn't written 600 pages of nonsense? I think it's brilliant. It's a brilliantly freeing way to think about your writing as to just allow yourself to write with no expectation. And maybe that's what every first draft is in the eye of the writer. It is like, you know, 50,000 words, 70,000 words of nonsense, because it's about how do we make sense of nonsense is no sense, right? So how do we make sense of that in the second draft? But I love the fact that he learned so much about the writing process through that journey.
Totally. I tell you what, he finished it. Yeah. He got to the end. That's the key, isn't it?
It finished 600 pages of nonsense.
Precisely. And you've then got something to what you will have learned so much from doing that, about beginnings, about middles, about endings, about character arcs, stories, the whole thing, and no one needs to see it. You know, it's your dirty laundry. No one else gets to see it. You know, you don't feel obliged to get it published or whatever. I've got so many hundreds and thousands of pages of nonsense that I've written that no one's ever going to see. But that's kind of the bedrock of who I am as a writer. That's where I started. You know, we hear a lot of I mean, he said it was kind of a Game of Thrones style, you know, influenced by that. And we've spoken to so many authors who started out writing fan fiction. You know, they would write in another universe because they don't necessarily want, you know, half the battle is coming up with the world and characters and putting that all together. Well, you tell you what, let's write in the Game of Thrones universe. I'm just going to do that, and I'm going to write that. I'm going to have fun with it, and they're going to learn so much about it. Why not? Why not do it? If you're struggling with your first fantasy novel, why not write something in George R.R. Martin? As long as you don't make any money from it, you're fine. You're absolutely fine.
But we've heard about writers, you know, even people that we're coaching in the academy have talked about that they've rewritten. They've written out, I mean, Chris Willis talked about rewriting like a chapter from one of his favorite novels. And what Jeremy talked about is he said, I wrote in the style of, or I ripped off, you know, and that is absolutely valid. Like, try to do that. Try to write in the style of your favorite author. Try and be a Stephen King or a J.K. Rowling or whoever it might be for you, so that you can learn about what parts of that come naturally to you and what parts feel unauthentic or not natural. And that's how you start to shape your voice. Yeah, you know, it's absolutely. Not, people talk about finding their voice as if you're kind of going off with a backpack and you're going off on this, like, you know, hero's journey quest where you're looking around, you're digging, you're chasing rainbows, you're searching for that buried treasure. Well, the treasure might not be buried. It might be right on your bookshelf. And all you have to do is you have to like go and grab all your favorite authors and try and write in their styles. And you might end up being an aggregation of multiples, which makes your style unique. So it might not be about, you know, discovering your voice. It might be learning what your voice is through practice, which is absolutely what the writing process is. So I love that. And I salute Jeremy for doing that. I also just want to say as well, Mark, this again came up in the coaching and the academy on Monday when we talked about people being the most self-critical of anyone in the world about their own writing. So I just want to put a bit of a massive like neon disclaimer on everything that we're saying, because here's the thing. As a writer, you will be the harshest critic of everything you write. So if you think that your work is nonsense or rubbish or low grade, I promise you that will be its lowest rating in the world, which means that anyone else that reads it won't have quite as an extreme, possibly negative view of it, which means it is actually better than you think it is. And what actually counts is not what you think it is, it's what the reader thinks it is, because they're the ones that buy your books ultimately.
And that's what comes back to that emotional response. That's what you're trying to, and you have no control over that. You can do the best you can by presenting them with a story and this weird collection of words that somehow paints a picture in our head or not, depending on how neurotypical you might be. We've heard about people who don't see it like that. But it's that thing of you're eliciting these emotions from people with words, which strikes me as strangely magical and alchemical and weird. So if you even get the slightest emotion out of someone, you're some kind of strange word wizard.
But here's a task for everyone this week. When you sit down to write something that might make someone cry, tears of laughter or tears of sorrow. Like, try it because most people.
That's hard.
I know it's hard, but the thing is, you've got to practice it. In fact, one of the things I found through doing public speaking is I learned the process of eliciting emotion in people when I was telling certain stories in my speeches and things, and it's like a comedian in a weird way. It's like how a comedian goes out and tries their jokes, and sometimes you get a laugh, and other times you get unexpected laughs, and other times people are rolling in the seats. But you have to go out and try it to get the feedback to know what works and what doesn't. And I think most people who've never had someone cry or laugh with tears at their book is because they've never actually tried it, because they don't think they're capable of doing it.
That's a really, really
right?
Interesting point.
Everyone is.
It took me years to. I think I first made someone. I got the feedback that I'd made someone cry with The End of Magic. So that's my third book.
Yeah.
So robots.
That you heard
I think
about
was
as well. That you heard about as well. But usually you do hear about those extreme responses. That's the other good thing about getting people's emotions is they're then moved to write to you and say, "Oh my gosh, this was incredibly powerful. Yeah. This really moved me."
And I've certainly had it on all of the Witches of Woodville books, because there is a moment in each of them that I think has a kind of emotional peak. But it's hard. It took me years to master that. Well, I've mastered it. I say master it, just manage it,
Well, mastering it, I think it's that whole we're mastering it for the rest of our lives, aren't we? And we'll never quite.
You've got to be careful as well, because you can't. I think people are suspicious of the kind of cheap emotion. They see through it. It needs to have a truth to it. Yeah. And it's, it's the difference between a kind of a Hallmark card and a novel.
And a novel. You've got to be invested in the character. The character's it's like, a pet dying, right? Somebody else says, "Oh, it's just a cat." And it's like, no, this was like 20 years. This is our family pet. It was a member of the family. There's got to be some kind of depth of character that connects you. That we cry when we lose something that's really heartfelt to us. So that word heartfelt is linked to emotion. And anyway, we could dive deep into this. Come and join the Academy, folks. We talk about this all the time there. So this is the kind of crazy level of detail we go into. But seriously, let's talk also about, very interesting that Jeremy was talking about this kind of role, social media, mental health, but the changing role of the author and the publisher. We were talking before the show, weren't we, about this analogy of how the expectation of the author has changed over the years with the advent of social media. You think back to like the late 80s, early 90s, when there wasn't social media. When you signed a book deal, your job was to write the book and then probably show up at a few book signings, maybe do a few interviews. But it was the job of the publisher to go out and market the book. But nowadays, it's more of a collaboration, or if you're a self-published author, you'll know that you've got everything to do. You're sweeping the floor and doing the social media posts as well as writing the book. So there's a changing expectation here, isn't there? And that, I think, is a lot of pressure on a lot of authors who are having to keep up the social media game, as it were, to try and keep publisher happy.
There's so much to discuss here. And in the extended, we're going to talk about selling yourself on social media in a bit more detail, aren't we? And selling the book on social media. We're going to talk about that in the extended version. But there is a link in the show notes to Jeremy's Twitter thread, which is definitely worth reading, because it's very common. And like I said, there was a survey in April of this year. 54% of authors found publishing the debut negatively affected their mental health. And that's a combination of things. It's not just social media. It's coming into an industry that it isn't very good at explaining what it's about. It has this, strange lingo that we use.
Still a black art, isn't it, for many people?
Yeah, we assume a lot of knowledge. What's interesting is this year, a couple of publishers are making efforts at beginning with sort of introductory courses for other authors and saying, okay, this is what we mean when we send you your edits. And you hear about authors who get their edits back and don't know what track changes are. And don't know how that works, and no one's shown them how to do it. Of course, if you sign up to the academy, this stuff is explained to you, and I'm here to talk about it because I've been through it many times. But
we get to see your Scrivener files and layouts,
and Word docs and things like that. So I do outline all that stuff, but most people don't know it now. The Gen X part of me is going, oh, for goodness sake, if you're going to go into an industry, learn about it. There's a part of me that's kind of, oh, honestly, get a grip kind of thing. But also, publishing is really bad at this. It is genuinely really, really bad at this. And part of that is because, one, it's been very cliquey. It's a lot of people come from the same backgrounds who will assume, oh, you went to the same schools that I went to, you went to the same universities. And now that we're getting a much more diverse bunch of authors writing now, they're coming from different backgrounds and they don't have this knowledge necessarily, and also it's just, publishers are massively understaffed now as well. A lot of the editors just don't have time to hold your hand and take you through this kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting. A couple of publishers are making efforts to change this. Let's see if they're still doing it in a year's time, shall we? I've seen them start these things before, and it doesn't always, keep going. But it is a bit tough. I think authors, when you're going into if I was to suddenly become, change industry, and if I was to become a lawyer or a barrister or something, I would learn something about the industry before I hurl myself into it, Exactly. So we have to take a bit of personal responsibility for this stuff. Yeah. But where do we go for this information? Where do we go? Who do we ask?
Exactly. The thing is, partly it's interesting because when I came into this podcast 6 years ago, part of my fascination, and part of the reason I thought, it'd be so fun working with Mark is because you worked in the publishing industry, and from my perspective, it was all a black art. I didn't even know the different types of editors that there were. Yeah. And I know a lot of people are listening to this podcast to learn all that because, we even do a course about, the different types of editors so that people can understand that. And I think what's really important here is, as a writer, you've got a massive undertaking and a personal growth that you're going through as a writer, how to be a better writer, how to write the best book you can. And that's obviously a big focus of what we're looking to do. But then outside of that, there's this whole other learning curve about, what is this thing called the publishing industry? And even if you're not, and in some ways, if you're going to self-publish, you need to become more knowledgeable about that than someone who's published with a traditional, because you're having to understand it from the nuts and bolts up. And so you've got these two massive things that you've got to start to learn. And the most important thing is to not get overwhelmed by either of them. I think it's very easy when you stand as an author and you start to kind of you open the front door of the house and you kind of look in and go, oh my gosh, there's a lot of rooms in here. This is a big house and there's tunnels and there's secret passages and all kinds of things going on. You want to basically take your time and allow yourself, but set the intention right now, if you've not been there, that you are going to really focus on your craft and focus on your kind of the mental side of writing, like the inner game of writing, as I call it. And also set an intention that you're going to learn at least the basics of how the publishing industry works, because that's the machine that you're sticking your book into. right? You're putting your book into that machine. And if you don't understand how it works, that brilliant book that you've written might get chewed up and spat out. And nothing to do with whether it's a good book or a bad book. It just never gets a chance to shine within that world. So really encourage people just to kind of
it might be a case of, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, because people go into bookshops and think they know how the sausage is made. They think, oh yeah, the writer writes a book, publisher publishes it, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. No, it's not. It's a whole process, and you can be chewed up and spat out. And the author who gets a $500,000 advance and a massive marketing campaign is very different to the author who gets a $5,000 advance and no marketing whatsoever.
Exactly.
It's a totally different experience, and it's I've seen both happen, constantly, and it's a roller coaster, as we say, an emotional roller coaster.
It is emotional. Yeah, there you go. I mean, it's the same thing back to front. So we're going to go deeper into this in the extended. I'm going to talk a bit about this idea that people like to buy, but they don't like to be sold to. So if you're struggling to sell your books online, I'm going to go into a bit of the consumer psychology behind the reader, which I think you'll find very, very interesting. We're also going to talk about the value of writing short stories, the milestone of selling your first short story, and delve a little bit into this incredible story that Jeremy told us about Chinese sci-fi world with 1 million circulation, like the things you just don't realize are out there. And Mark's going to give us his number one tips for writing action scenes, which I can't wait to hear. So if you'd like to join us in the extended, it's very simple. You simply sign up to become a patron. It's pennies per month. Or if you're a part of the Academy, you get all of the extended podcasts for free on our very special Bestseller Academy app, which you get as part of your membership. So pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com/support for the patron, and academy.bestsellerexperiment.com for the Academy.
Links in the show notes.
So thank you for joining us in the extended edition of this podcast. And we're going to continue to talk about the psychology of selling as an author. Listening to Jeremy's kind of struggles, I think we could say, of this, he mentioned specifically about this idea of having to continually push, and how much can you push on social media, and you feel like you're just banging on about buy my book. And it reminded me of this I studied consumer behavior at university back in the day. And it reminded me of this really important phrase I think that we all need to remind ourselves or learn about as authors selling our books to people. And every single author is a salesperson in that regard, although we shouldn't really think of ourselves like that. And that is the line, people like to buy, but they don't like to be sold to. And so I want everyone to write that down and think about that, because go look at your social media posts, go look at what you're writing on your blogs, go think about how you're talking with people. Are you trying to really sell people your book for you, my book, or are you trying to sell them the experience of what they're going to get when they read your book? What's in it for them? We always talk about that radio station, WIIFM, WIIFM, right? What's in it for them? So I think we can, if we're feeling like we're trying to sell our book too hard, it's probably because we're doing it the wrong way, because we can talk limitlessly about the benefits of reading our book to somebody. And no one likes, this is a funny thing, Mark, isn't it? No one really likes to sell, do they? It's like, it feels, some people aren't natural ball salespeople, and everyone hits some point where we think, oh, I'm just flogging this too hard, I should stop banging. Everyone's thinking, God, all he ever talks about is his book, right?
Yeah, well, the other thing is not all authors are equal. I mean, like we said, if you're the author with the $500,000 advance, the publisher's doing all the selling for you. You don't need to do anything. You can be that author who sits back and go, oh, I'm writing in a cafe today, and that's it. And you don't need to. And every now and then you get people who go, oh, apparently my book is a Kindle daily deal. Here's a link kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's all they do.
Yeah.
Whereas at the other end, you've got people who are like me. I schedule a post per day that tells you about me or the books or how you can find out more about them and all that kind of thing. Because I don't get any marketing. I don't. Simple as that. Yeah. I might get one Kindle deal a year, and when the book comes out, I get a blog tour, and that's kind of it. Because I'm just not their tip-top priority. And that is the story for most authors. So there is this discrepancy that we expect when we sign a deal. This is the thing, if you're one of these authors who doesn't know much about the industry, you think, great, I've signed a deal. There's going to be tube adverts are going to be on the side of a bus. I'm going to, might even get some, TV advertising, blah, blah. No, you're not. You're genuinely not. That's for the 1%. They get that. None of us get that. So it can be a real shock to the system. And then you think, hang on, I've got to shill my book every day. And what makes it more difficult is there is an attitude amongst a certain number of authors that you shouldn't be selling yourself at all. You'll hear this. People go, no, you shouldn't sell your book at all. The publisher should do that. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do? Sit on my hands?
1980s.
Yeah.
1980s, Back to the Future, right? That's what used to happen.
Yeah.
And you know what? They do have a point, though, because you do ask yourself the question, well, if the publisher's not marketing your book, then what's
the point of the
doing?
Publisher?
Exactly. And actually, I think the challenge is, and this is the problem, Mark, this is where the publishing industry finds itself between a rock and a hard place, is that I think a lot of publishers are taking on authors a bit like publishing companies take on musicians. And the way they do that is they get your publishing. So let's talk about it from a music perspective. To sign a publishing deal as a musician means that you kind of give over your catalogue of everything you've written and everything you will write. And they are meant to go out and generate royalties for that, like get it on a movie, get it on a film, like do a deal with this, do a deal with that. What actually happens in reality for the majority of people is the publishing company are signing up that musician or that band so that no one else can get them.
Yes. Yeah,
and then they're sitting on that catalogue with the hope that one day they'll have a massive breakthrough hit, and without doing a penny, without doing a thing, suddenly the royalties will come flooding in, and then it'll all. And the thing is, with a publisher, it's fine because you can sign 100 bands, and I promise you that one of them probably will blow up and will cover the costs of the other 99 and then some. And so I think the problem with social media, and this, we talked about this in the regular podcast, about this idea that it's now expected of the author to do a lot of the marketing. I think the biggest challenge is a lot of the book publishing companies are now going to sit back and go, great. It's a bit like, it's a really crass analogy, but it's a bit like how the government won't deal with the food crisis because there are charities running food banks, and they're kind of like...
Yeah.
I'm a little bit too close to the bone there, I think, for a lot of authors there. But the point is that as more authors, as more authors become great publicists and great marketers, it means that the publisher can sit back and go, great, let them go for it, because we're quite happy to sit there and take our chunk of the royalties without doing too much of the work.
But the danger is, and I'm starting to see this, I'm starting to see authors published by traditional publishers who are looking over the fence at self-publishing and going, oh, actually, I know how to do that.
Yes.
I know how to arrange a blog tour. I know how to do this, that, and the other.
Yeah, and that's where the shift's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. People who are so entrenched in traditional publishing, they're kind of, I just can't be asked kind of thing. They just don't want to be able, don't want to bother. And there's the expense as well of, setting up this, that, and the other. But I know a lot of authors who are trying to get rights back to things so that they can self-publish and start doing it for themselves and doing it properly and doing it on a global stage, and some of the responses to this whole mental health crisis and has been, there's one publisher, I won't name them because I only heard it sort of secondhand, but apparently their response to this,
might have to resign if you named them, Mark.
Is their response has been, well, we'll just take on fewer authors. So
that solves everything.
If we're not giving them the attention they deserve, maybe we'll just take fewer authors on and concentrate on those.
Isn't there a bit of a catch-22 in all of this as well? Because isn't the original reason that publishers set up, going back, tens, 20, hundreds of years, to allow the author to get on with what they're doing best at, which is writing.
Yeah.
And the thing is, as publishers are expect authors to be more part of the marketing machine, so to speak, then everyone kind of loses in some ways, because whilst you're on social media, you're not writing your next book. And in fact, but since social media has become so prevalent, has author output dropped? Because it's dropped as much as, say, 50% compared to authors that didn't have to deal with dealing with publishing publishing websites and social media. I don't know. I mean, it's a bit of a catch-22. I mean, I still, honestly, I wouldn't change what we have today, though, because I think the fact that anyone can publish a book, it's absolutely brilliant. And I think, but it is, I think publishers, particularly old style traditional publishers, are finding themselves in a bit more of a corner, and they're going to have to work out. It's going to change again, I think. I think maybe publishers might take on more of the marketing in the future when they realize that they're better off letting the author get on with the work. So maybe there's a place for that again.
Yeah, they need to stop making people redundant and,
well, why are they making people
one person
redundant?
doing the job of 5,
Why are they making people redundant? Is it because authors aren't writing as many books because they're too busy having to market their books on social media? Who knows? There's a big circular argument there. But anyway, we could go down the rabbit hole with this, but it's fascinating. But remember, folks, if you're in the process of selling your book, thinking about, step back from it and ask yourself, am I encouraging people to buy the book, or I'm trying to oversell this? Am I pushing them too hard? And think about it in terms of what's in it for the reader. That is the most important thing you can do, for sure. Now, Mark, I know you're fascinated by this action scene and action writing that Jeremy, as he was speaking, he was almost like writing the prose of this amazing scene that's happening.
Loved it.
And inspired you to share your tips for writing action scenes.
Yes. So let's define what we're talking about. Action scenes, fight scenes, battle scenes, anything where there's this kind of visceral action going on, that I want to talk about that. And so I'm going to run through a few tips. And the number one is don't mistake writing action just for the sake of it. I mean, how many action set pieces have we read in books or seen in films that feel like they're there simply because the writer thinks it should be? It needs to have some kind of purpose. I mean, exception to the rule is the last couple. I tell you, talking about going to see movies, before Oppenheimer, I went to see the new Mission Impossible. Oh my God. I mean, Chris McQuarrie, and I've heard interviews of Chris McQuarrie, who's written and directed the last 3 Mission Impossible films. What he does, he finds the location first, thinks of a set piece, and then writes the movie around those set pieces. That's the exception to the rule. Don't do this because you're not Chris McQuarrie, okay? He's a genius, right? But what you need to do is make the action feel a natural part of the story. So ask yourself the following questions. Does it move the story forward? Now, if you took the fight out of the story or the action, what would change? And ask yourself, what's at stake? And is it motivated by character and what they need? And does the story flow in and out of the action naturally? Or does everything stop and go, right, we're going to have a fight now? It needs to be needs to segue naturally. And what are the consequences of the action? What has it changed? It's like any other story beat. Is the protagonist closer or further away from their goal after the fight? So make sure it has some sort of story purpose. Think about the details in an action scene. A little goes a long way. I know people who are experts in sword fighting and hand-to-hand combat or whatever, and there are scenes where they just give you too much information. It's like a blow-by-blow account. And while it's wise to consult an expert, so if you're dealing with, archery or guns and knives, try and find someone who's used it, but don't overdo it. It's like any piece of research. Let the reader fill in the gaps. And ask yourself, what kind of fighter are they? So if you've got this expert trained assassin, that's thrilling. That is, it's great seeing that, seeing how they work or whatever. But it's also fun to see someone bungling their way through a fight. One of the things we love about Indiana Jones is the difference between James Bond and Indiana Jones. James Bond is a trained killer, and he can sneak in and assassinate someone and sneak out again, and it's all thrilling. Indiana Jones is a professor who maybe got in a few bar fights or whatever. I mean, if you look at young Indiana Jones, he did go to war, First World War, what have you. But he's a scrappy fighter. He never gives up. He's always being beaten to the point of almost being defeated, but he always dusts himself off. I mean, there's also that classic bit in Raiders of the Lost Ark where they had a big fight scene with the guy with the big scimitar in the market.
Oh, yeah.
And Harrison Ford they'd all eaten something dodgy. They all had diarrhea. And he said, can't I just shoot him? So he shot him. And it did, it's one of those...
Best bit in the film.
Best bit in the film. And it also cut out a really unnecessary fight scene. It didn't move the plot forward at all. And it gave us, one of the great moments in the film. So try and, subvert expectations if you can. Think about the location of the action scene. So, a fight in a pub car park is going to be very different to one in an elevator or a train compartment or something like that. A battle at sea is going to be very different to one on an icy plane, So think about your environment and how it affects the preparation, the execution, and the aftermath of the action. And be inventive. If there's a fight in a DIY store, have the characters grab stuff off the shelves and go crazy with a chainsaw or a circular saw or something, have fun with it. Writing style. Now, consider the genre. There are some genres, we talked about fantasy, science fiction, thrillers, historical fiction, that love an extended action or battle or fight scene. It's part of their DNA. Other genres might have a fight scene, but you just need to skip over details to get to the next story beat. So read examples in your genre and take notes. See how they work. Coming back to style, pick up the pace with the action. Avoid blow-by-blow descriptions. Use shorter sentences. Maybe dash it with dialogue. Break it up with dialogue. Although, try and avoid those annoying sort of Joss Whedon-style quips. It's one of the things that annoys me about a lot of those kind of, Marvel movies or whatever, where people are making jokes in all the action, and it just strikes me as completely unrealistic now. Choose verbs over adverbs and avoid the passive voice. So, for example, if you're saying the boxer hit him in the ribs over and over, okay, but it's less effective than the boxer pummeled his ribs, right? Choose verbs over adverbs. Make it active. Make it, let's see it. Think about the senses. The vision could be blurred or could be totally sharp. Everything could be hyper real. What do they hear in the chaos of battle? When a bomb goes off, your ears are going to be ringing. What do they smell? There's sweat, there's burning flesh, there's bodily fluids. Again, go to town on it. Have fun. Use your imagination. Think about touch and physicality. Fighting hurts. Make us feel it. The truth is, few of us have ever been in a fight. And if we have been in a fight, it probably hasn't been since, the fifth form playground scrap that we had with a school bully. So here's the thing. I'm not asking you to get into a fight or join a fight club. Maybe join a martial arts group, okay? Take a few karate or taekwondo lessons and get thrown about a bit and build on your sense memory. And think about the physical consequences. We grew up in an era where the A team would be blown over in a car and they'd run out and they'd grab, my head hurts, and they'd be fine next week. Okay. We now live in a world where in Breaking Bad, Hank gets shot in season 3. He's never the same again. He is completely, physically damaged by it, mentally damaged by it. People expect the pain to last. So think about that. And lastly, give the fight a beginning, middle, and an end. It's a story beat like any other. And also put off the fight for as long as possible. Few people actually want to fight, so it's relatable for a character to want to avoid one. And then think about those stakes and see if you can raise them during the action. So you can have a goal. You want to win this fight to get this goal, but maybe an ally of yours, someone the protagonist loves, they might be wounded or killed, and that raises the stakes and sends them into a frenzy or makes it harder for them. So think about that. There's a lovely moment in The Princess Bride which has 2 of the best fight scenes you'll ever see in cinema, where Inigo Montoya and Wesley, they're fighting with swords, and they're fighting left-handed, and they both reveal, I'm actually not left-handed. So they start fighting right-handed. It's brilliant. It's genius. It just ups the stakes, and it's one of the best fight scenes in cinema. And maybe they could do things like, think about how it ends. Maybe they show mercy at the last minute. What have they learned from the action? Take us to the edge. Make us think they're going to lose. And maybe even they do, and they need to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. So those are my top tips for writing a bit of action or a fight scene.
Absolutely brilliant stuff. And maybe, just maybe, if you wanted to practice this, you could write a short story, which is an action scene, because we also wanted to talk about short stories. There's a lot here to unpack. We've seen one Academy member, Karen, have incredible, in fact, she is a specialist short story writer, and she writes so many short stories. She enters them in all competitions. I think she writes short stories based on the competition that comes up, and she has such a massive success. And it was really interesting hearing Jeremy's, that his life started with a milestone of writing and then selling his first short story. And it got me thinking about the value of short stories within our journey as authors, because there's this huge undertaking when we're going to sit down and write a book. I mean, I'm there right now. I'm talking about writing a whole series of books, and it's like, oh, this is a life project. This is a big thing. Short stories enables us to get those mini wins. I mean, they're major wins, but what I mean by that is they're wins that can happen in the short term, which can help to build our confidence bit by bit. Because part of the whole writing process is actually about building our confidence as a writer as well. Something we've learned hugely from working with people in Academy. Like, the confidence factor isn't key. It's number one to being successful, but it's also probably the largest thing that people are struggling and dealing with in their own life. So short stories, if you're really struggling with your book, maybe take a break, maybe even write the book as a short story so that you can just finish something, see the kind of arc of what you're writing. And then there's the other example we've had many times over from popular authors whose short stories have then become their novel, have become their breakthroughs, have become movies. How many times have we heard that, Mark, on the podcast?
Well, I mean, I have an example for you. I mean, the other value is, one, as you say, it's just Jeremy was talking about when he sold a story, he said he felt like I've cracked a code, So there is that value of, if you sell a short story to one of these anthologies or magazines or websites or what have you, it's for many people, before they get a book deal, it's the thing that says to them, you are a writer, you are legit. It doesn't have to be that way, but for some people that means an awful lot. But yes, a short story is your intellectual property. And I've got a couple of examples. Rowan Coleman and I, during lockdown, we were talking about her short stories, and she said, I've always wanted to write a screenplay. Well, one of her short stories was called Saturday Night Stevie. We took that short story, we took that as the opening scene of a screenplay. We've written a screenplay. It's been optioned. It's in development with a film company. We're looking for a director. Might be a movie one day. And we've been paid money to write that as well. So that short, 3,000 words, has now become, a potential movie. And another one of her short stories, we've now extrapolated out into a TV show. Finished it this afternoon, written the pilot and their pitch deck for it. So I won't mention any more at the moment, but that's about to go out to people. So
you get all the exclusives in the extended edition, don't you? Okay. Brilliant.
The other thing that I've been doing with my short stories, which is a Woodville short stories, is world building. I'm building on the world. And if you have a series of any kind, you can go into, like he says, you can go into these little corners of the sandbox that you don't normally visit when you write a novel. You can maybe feature characters, background characters, and bring them to the fore. And it's something I've done an awful lot with the Witches of Woodville characters. And the value that I give to them is that if you sign up to my newsletter, you get this little library of short stories for free. And
so short stories become the lead magnet, which is the one thing that most authors are missing. So there's so many benefits, hundreds of benefits to short stories, as well as the fact that, it gives you, it's practice. It's just writing practice, and it's more self-contained. So I think anyone that's taken on a huge writing project and hasn't done short stories. I mean, again, think about it from a non-fiction point of view. What are your short stories in non-fiction? They're your blog posts. How many books have were started off as blogs and become hugely popular blogs, and then somebody's got an author deal on the back of that, and they've just taken all of their blog posts and kind of melded them into something that looks like a book, and those are short articles. So it works again if you're non-fiction. There's a lot of non-fiction fiction writers. They're one of the same people. You might have a blog around your profession, or your coaching, or something that you do, an interest or a hobby that you have. That's a practice for what then might become the fiction or the non-fiction book that you're writing. So there's what's not to love about a short story is absolutely brilliant. Now, a question that I think everyone would want to ask, Mark, and again, there are no rules, but generally, what is considered a short story in terms of word count, would you say?
Ooh.
I mean, a short story can be 100 words, can't it? I mean, there's competitions which, write a story in 100 words less, but what would you say is the upper limit? Well, it is
really hard. Absolutely. I mean, and of course, isn't there that famous short story which is 6 words long, which is, isn't it?
Oh,
baby shoes for sale, never worn.
Yes.
Or never used, or whatever it was.
Is it haiku? Am I thinking right? Is that?
Well, haiku is a form of poetry, isn't it? It's
right, but it's like a short story in a very short line. What would be the maximum, we say? At what point does a short story, like becomes a single to an EP to an album? I mean, are we talking like 3,000, 4.5? I mean, 5,000 is that?
I aim for somewhere between 3 and 5 for a short story, because that's kind of what I enjoy. Anything longer than that starts to... but I regularly see short stories that are 10, 12,000, 20,000 words. Once you get to 30,000, you're kind of in novella territory.
Yeah,
you know?
I think of a novella more like 10,000 upwards. But I guess, again, there's no rules. But yeah. No. But a short story, a good short story can be 1,000 words. It doesn't have to be 5,000.
I would say the crucial difference is a short story tends to be about one thing, and it focuses on that one thing. Once you start introducing subplots and threads, that's novella. And that's novel. You know, the more threads you have, the more novelistic it becomes. Yeah. And I think it's not so much the word count, it's the fact that if you're just talking about one thing, one subject, straight down the line, that's a short story. And it's like, we're just going to talk about this one thing today. We're going to do it quickly.
And limited characters, I'm guessing, as well, because you can't really, I mean, you're only really going to develop one, maybe two characters. So you probably, if you start having a crowd of characters, you're probably going down the wrong route to begin with.
Well, each one of those characters will have an arc that needs to be resolved, you know, and that might be a couple of lines, or it could be the whole thing. And once you start adding, you know, characters in, then it becomes quite difficult. Although it's interesting, you know, you can think of story beats and sequences in your novels as short stories. You know, you can think of, okay, I'm going to, well, like we said with the action sequences, think of the action sequence as its own beginning, middle, and an end, as a little short sequence within a greater story. And then you start thinking, you know, macro to micro kind of thing.
Absolutely. So, folks, here's your homework for this week. If you've never written a short story, it's been years since you've written a short story, or you're kind of a bit stuck in your book right now and you need a little bit of inspiration, 200-word challenge, the next 7 days, spend 200 words a day trying to write a short story. That gives you about 1,400 words to play with. That's a decent amount. Give it a go. If you get success with it, we want to hear your experience of what happened. And if in 3 or 5 years from time, that little short story that you write this week becomes a movie, then we'll take 10%?
Yeah.
No, but joking.
Just five.
If we want to hear about successes down the road, so if you're listening to this, you know, years down the road, and one of your short stories has had a great success and evolved into something bigger, then let us know, because we'd love to share that with everyone.
And that's 5% of the first dollar box office gross. Not that. Just want to. I've learned that the hard
Not getting technical. I need to ask you what that is, because I've no idea. But thank you very much, folks, for listening to The Extended today. We so appreciate your support, and as much as we appreciate your support, we also appreciate your word of mouth as well. So please do tell everyone about all of this extra bonus goodies that people get. I
get messages from listeners on a Monday morning saying, "What a wonderful episode! The Extended was so great." I'm like, "Thank you, that's really nice. Now tell your friends."
Tell someone. Absolutely brilliant. That's great, and we'll be back with more soon, folks. So, folks, thank you very much if you listen to The Extended, and we're going to dive into this week's wins on social media as well, Mark.
Just a couple of bits. It's been a long episode, so we'll just keep it short and sweet today. But some wonderful stuff. Gavin Ralph, much treasured member of the BXP team, who's written Murder on Milverton Square and Poison at Penshaw Hall, which is coming soon. It's coming October 2023. He said, "I have to share a win today." Now, Gavin self-publishes and does it really, really well. Amazing covers, brilliant writer. Says, "My cozy murder mysteries are coming to ears near you. Recently finalised an audio rights deal with Tantor Media to produce and publish the first 2 Milverton mysteries as audiobooks." So this, and he's done a little graphic and everything. It's terrific. Now this is what we were talking about during the Extended, about authors, you know, taking control of their careers, not relying on publishers to do things, you know. So Gavin's Tantor Media is the real deal. We used to, you know, when I was at Orion, we deal with them all the time in order to produce audiobooks. So that is terrific. That's going wide. Audiobooks still, you know, growing massively. Huge. So Gavin, huge congratulations on that. I think that's massive news. Brilliant. Really, really good news. So huge congrats. And Mark Hood, the legend Mark Hood, We've had Mark on the podcast a couple of times, I think. Still got his incredible 200 words a day streak. He says recently on the podcast, there was advice on finding a nice book to put positive things in. So he says, I've got this now. And there's a beautiful picture of this antique wooden box with a wonderful old lock on the cover, on the front of it as well. He says, I've put in printouts of good reviews, comments people have sent me, and feedback from submissions. So I have a collection of positive messages to flick through if I need reassuring. Now this was this came from you, didn't it, Mr.
It did, yeah. It's a story of I've created a kind of I've got a physical location, and also I got a folder on my whenever we get a lovely email from someone who's enjoyed the podcast, I save it. I literally kind of I create a PDF of it, so it almost makes it kind of like permanent forever. And Brilliant. The story behind a lovely my mother-in-law is a teacher. She said whenever she had a bad day, she'd open up a box of letters that she got from students of the past. And I think we just need to start doing things like this, folks, because, everyone has tough days. And as much as these things fill us up and they're wonderful in the moment, they have a lasting effect, and they remind us of the value that we're creating in other people's lives. And that, folks, strip away everything else. That's why we show up here in the world. That's the legacy that we can leave behind. So yeah, I reckon everyone else should do that. We'll give it an official title when I come up with one. But yeah, good for Mark for getting out the gate and kicking it off. Brilliant stuff.
Brilliant. Well, folks, if you've had a win, no matter how big or small, we want to hear about it. So drop us a line. If you go to bestsellerexperiment.com, there's a contact tab there. We can email us directly. We read all the emails. On social media, on Facebook, we're Bestseller Experiment. On Twitter, Instagram, and Threads, we're at Bestseller. Is it Instagram? Is it Twitter anymore?
Twitter?
What's he calling it? X. Yeah, X. Oh, I'm not doing that. I can't do it. I can't bring myself to say it. Anyway, we are at Bestseller XP. So drop us a line there. And if you've enjoyed this, if you've been inspired by Jeremy or any of the authors that we've spoken to, give us a rating, give us a review wherever you listen to your podcast, and please subscribe, because that stuff really, really helps.
And join the Bestseller Experiment newsletter. Get weekly updates of all of the guests that we've interviewed, things we've learned, things you'll learn as well. So pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com and click on the newsletter tab to sign up and get a bonus download, Mark. If people still can get that. So go and check that out.
I forget about that. Yeah.
It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And also, folks, remember, if you've enjoyed this and you've been inspired by Mark and I, and you'd like us to be your coaches, you're writing your book, you need a bit of accountability, you want a bit more of that inspiration, and we get to know you personally, and that's a bit we love. We get to know about you, your book, your story, and we get to encourage you through the whole process. Then pop along to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com and put in your application for the Bestseller Academy, starting at the beginning of September. So you've got a few more weeks yet.
Get in there.
Brilliant stuff. Well, have a great writing week, Mark, and for everyone out there in podcast land, have a wonderful week writing. And it's goodbye from Mark 1.
And a goodbye from Mark 2.
Goodbye.